All right, so we are picking up in chapter 32, verse 24, and we're going to finish off the chapter. So, Jacob has sent messengers out to reach his brother. They come back saying that Esau is on his way with 400 men. Jacob gets scared and he starts sending his peace offerings of all these gifts of animals to his brother, and he sits down and he prays. And he reminds God of his promise, and he is like, all right, let's do this thing. And so he prepares that night to meet his brother, and we are picking up in verse 24. And so it says in verse 24 that Jacob was left alone. So he has put his family over across this ford, and they're kind of separated by some water. And he has kind of made it so that he would be the first person that his brother and these men would see after these gifts reach him, so that he can kind of provide a line of protection for his family. And so it says that there he wrestled with the man until the breaking of day. So this at this point he is by himself. He is kind of sitting alone. He has prayed, and there is a man that comes by. Remember, he's in a place where he has said that there are two camps. There are angels and there are people there. And he this man comes along and he wrestles with him. Like, he grabs him up, he pins him, and he starts to wrestle with him, and they wrestle throughout the night. And in verse 25, it says, when he sees that he has not prevailed, so Jacob is so stubborn and is so strong and is so focused on what he's doing that this angel hasn't shaken him. And so what he does, he touches, depending on the version of the Bible, it says the hollow of his thigh. It's like his hip socket. He touches him in the hip, and it dislocates his hip. And so Jacob is still holding on to him even with this dislocated hip, but it is obvious at this point that he is not going to win. So at this point, he just holding on to him. And the man that he is wrestling with says, hey, let me go, man. Like, the sun is about to rise. It's time to let this be over with. Like, this is foolishness now. And Jacob says, I'm not going to let you go until you bless me. I know there's a blessing for me. I know that there is a scary situation ahead of me. I know there's something going on. I prayed, and then you came past here. I know that you are an angel. I know that you are a messenger of God. I know that there is something here for me. And the angel asked the man that's walking by, and this is very similar to the man that walked by, the two men that sat with Abraham and ate and then went into Sodom to pull Lot and his family out. Very similar situation. So the angel, or that man, asked, what's your name? And he's answered, and he says Jacob. So when he says Jacob, he said, look, you're not going to be Jacob anymore. Jacob was the old name. Jacob is the name they gave you when they called you a usurper. That's the name they gave you when they believed you were trying to take your brother's spot. That's the name that they gave you when they thought they knew who you were. Here's the name that I'm giving you. This is the name that God is changing your name to. This is the new you. That was then, this is new. And he gives him the name Israel. And Israel is it takes him from the person that they knew to who God is calling him to be. It's an elevation. He moves him into a prince. He moves him into the place and position that of authority and of influence that his father and his grandfather had. So now when we pray the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. He is now moving him from, the second son. He's moving him from, the second son of a second son. Like, they're moving him from that position to giving him this level of authority that makes him worthy and valuable and gives him a name that commands the respect and attention that his promise gives him. So the name change is essential. And so Jacob turns around and says, well, what's your name? And the angel was like, that's none of your business. But he's like, why do you need to know my name? Like, what does that have to do with anything? and he blesses him. And part of this blessing is the understanding that the name Israel is that he wrestled with God, or he struggled with God. And now, for all of us who are like, how you wrestle with God and live? He didn't wrestle with God and live. There is a man coming, is a man walking. He has identified that this is a space where angels and where people exist. This is a joint area. There's that acknowledgement there. Then on top of that acknowledgement, there is the understanding that he has prayed and asked God to assist him, to give him favor, to protect him, to bring him through. And he is met with this man who's there. I don't know why he was like, let me wrestle him and take my blessing. It's not about the strength that you do things in. The blessing was his regardless. The name change was his regardless. He had to fight God for it, but he did. And part of the struggle that Jacob had, and you'll see even in the future chapters that we're going to cover, is Jacob wrestled with God. He struggled with faith. He struggled with belief. He prayed sometimes the God of my father and my grandfather, not that he was his own personal God. He went back and he couldn't trust God. When God said go home, he wasn't like, hey, God, you told me to go home. I'm gone. If my brother's mad, you got to fix this. He came and he kind of prepared for a fight. He prepared for a war. He prepared to lose people. He prepared to lose potentially his own life. Why, if God told you to go? Why, if God told you to go and that he's going to take care of you, would you jump back into this? And part of the name change is to take him from who he was to into his legacy, into his future. As a man, you have your name, you are your own person. But when you have a son, you now have a legacy. When you put your name on your son, you get a junior or a third or a fourth, a fifth, keep it going. Because now you've created a legacy. This is a lifetime. And this name change is introducing him to his legacy. They are the Israelites. Those are his children. They are the Israelites, the tribes, the 12 tribes of Israel. They come from him. This line, his children, are what make up the tribes of Israel. And that's not something that they had before. His grandfather had 2 sons and the promise followed one. His father has 2 sons and the promise follows one. And now he has 11 sons at this point. There are 12. He has 11 sons at this point. And so he's seeing this legacy. But the struggle that he had with God wasn't always just that physical fight that he had with the angel that left him maimed for life. But it was, in fact, a struggle of faith. It was, in fact, a struggle with him feeling like he can have the things that God promised him. Him feeling like when every time something happened, he slipped back into this woe is me versus standing on the authority and the space that God gave him. So he has wrestled with an angel. Part of the name Israel means that he wrestled with God or struggled with God. And when they're saying with God, they don't mean physically our great big God that's outside of, heaven and earth. He is talking specifically about this angel or this messenger of God. So he asked for the angel's name, and the angel was like, here go your blessing, sir. And so Jacob renames this place, and it's Peniel. And it just means face to face, meaning he really came face to face with God. And these angels are messengers of God. They carry only what God tells them to carry. They say only what God tells them to say. They do the things that God tells them to do. So they are functional messengers of God. And that's why he's saying he's face to face with them. And as he leaves that place, he now has a limp. He walked with a limp. Now, when your blessing is on the way, don't fight it. Don't fight it. It wasn't necessary, because this limp was to remind him that his own strength wasn't what got the blessing. You didn't wrestle this angel and win a blessing. That this angel stopped you because you were being foolish. The blessing was yours. You don't have to fight for it. He had to sit there all night and wrestle this angel. He could have just said, hey, friend, I pray and I know that you are a messenger of God. I know you're an angel and I need you to give me the blessing that God has promised me. I need you to do the thing that God has said is going to happen. And they could have done this with a friendly conversation. But when you wrestle with God, my mom tells me all the time, your arms are too short to box with God. Stop trying. You're going to walk around with a limp. You're going to have sore knuckles. You're going to have a sore shoulder because you're trying to box with God. In this situation, he's trying to wrestle God. He spent the rest of his life with a limp. It's not necessary. You don't have to fight God for the things that he's giving you. You just got to be open to receive them. And understanding that with Jacob, he had to go through a lot of stuff to work out some of the foolishness that he had in him. This is the last little piece of foolishness that God had to work out of him before he could get down and do what he needed to do. And so, it says in verse 32 that the children of Israel no longer eat this particular, like the flesh that is above the hip or thigh of an animal because of, in remembrance of this, like to remember this, this situation, this limp that he carried, that they honor that by not messing with it or not eating it. And so I really want to drill down on this one section about him wrestling with the angel. Stop fighting God for your blessings. Stop feeling like it's something that you can do in your own strength. His own strength didn't do anything but waste time. He could have got that blessing and got some sleep. He could have walked away from that situation feeling full and happy from the conversation he had instead of walking away with a limp for the rest of his life. God does not need you to pull down a blessing from heaven physically. Understand that when you come in contact with God, when you have an encounter with the Holy Spirit, stop fighting it. It is not something that you have to wrestle away from God. God is not trying to test to see how tenacious you are. God is really trying to work out things that he doesn't need in your character. And that's one big thing about Jacob, is that he had to have a lot of things worked out of him. I believe Jacob was a mama's boy who really didn't stand up for himself, who kind of took things for what they were and allowed things to be what they were going to be. And he had to learn how to stand in authority, in the authority that God gave him. And that's what he got worked out dealing with Laban. When Laban tricked him on the wife thing, he worked 7 more years for what he already had paid for. He had already done. He said, hey, if you give me your daughter Leah, I will work 7 years for her. And he worked 7 years and he was given, if you give me Rachel, he worked 7 years for Rachel first and was given Leah. And instead of saying, no, sir, that's not the deal. That's not how this works. You're going to have to give me Rachel. If you give me Leah too, that's cool, but you got to give me Rachel. I fulfilled the obligation that I set. He allowed himself to have to work 7 more years for that wife. And in all that time, with all the tricks between the spotted, speckled, striped, colored sheep, and all these different things about how he was going to get his wages and go. And his uncle Laban continued to give him problem after problem, move the sheep away, decide, oh, you can't have the spotted ones, you got to have the speckled ones. You can't have the speckled ones, you got to get the striped ones. Like, all these changes, he never found his voice until God said, hey, it's time to go. And when he leaves and Laban comes after him, he finds his voice and he says, look, I did what I was supposed to do. This is what it is. We're going to call it an end here. Let's shake hands and walk away peacefully. Then he found his voice. And at that point, God was able to do a little bit more with him because he understood his authority. He kind of shook some of that mama's boy off when he let other people fight his battles. And he sat back and took things that he wasn't supposed to take from people. So let us remember, one, you can't fight God for the blessing. If you praying and God is saying no, take your no. If you are praying and God is saying not now, be patient. If you are praying and God is saying here it is, you don't have to fight to get it. It's coming for you. It's coming to you. It's yours. God said so. Remind God when you pray of the promise. And understand that God don't live in our time zone. Like, he don't exist on earth. He's not watching the clock for your blessing. So just trust that it's coming through. Trust that he's doing it. Okay. So quick recap. And then I'm going to go ahead and we're going to switch to the next video. And we're going to finish out the meeting between Esau and Jacob. So Jacob has separated everything out. He's prayed. He's done everything he's supposed to do to make sure that he has protected his family from his brother Esau and these 400 men that are coming. And when he is left alone, after he has kind of put his family off in a distance so they're a little bit safer, he sees a man and he determines that this man is an angel. There is a blessing for him from this man. He knows it, he feels it in his gut, and this man, and he starts to wrestle with him. And he is tussling, holding on to him, and they wrestle all night long. When the sun is getting ready to rise, the angel is like, look, man, we have done this for too long. Can you just stop? And Jacob is like, nah, it's not going to happen till you bless me. And so the angel touches his hip. And this is how you know it's an angel. He touches his hip, and his hip is dislocated. He could have took this man down at any point, any time. This could have been over a long time ago if all he had to do was touch him and dislocate his leg. So at this point, Jacob is still like, I'm not going to let you go till you bless me. So the angel asks what his name is. And he says, Jacob. He gives him the name that he's always been called, the usurper, the trickster. He gives him the name that he's always been called. And the angel says, nah, no more. Your name is going to be Israel. And the name Israel means one who wrestles with God or struggles with God. And it's not always a physical fight. Sometimes it is a struggle of faith. Sometimes it is a struggle of belief. And so he takes this new name and he lets this man go. He asked the angel what his name was, and the angel was like, gonna ignore that because you don't have no authority over me. I answer to God. And so he goes ahead, he blesses him, and they part ways. And when he does that, he walks away with this injured hip. You don't have to wrestle with God. You don't have to fight for the blessing. The blessing is yours if God said it. You don't have to fight him for it. All it does is leave you injured in a bad place. And this man walked with a limp for the rest of his life because he wanted to wrestle with God. So I want you guys to be blessed. I want you to remember that when you pray, trust God for an answer. And sometimes the answer is no. And when the answer is no, don't fight it. Just go ahead and move on to the next thing. Sometimes the answer is wait. Be patient. It is coming. And sometimes the answer is yes. And again, you don't gotta be like a dog snatching the mail from the mail slide, tearing it to pieces, you don't have to be like that. Just go ahead and collect what's yours. Okay? Y'all be blessed.